APL Volumes presents Austin Creates. Austin Creates is an interview series exploring creativity in Austin with people who are passionate about what they make. Today I spoke with Jeremy Young, Sous Chef at Ramen TatsuYa. We talked about a variety of topics: music.
In high school, I was really into music. I was in a lot of punk bands and metal bands, and I thought I wanted to be a touring musician.
Pickles.
I didn't know how to make a good pickle, and at home, I would just buy pickles. And looking back now, that's embarrassing because pickles are really easy to make if you know how to do it.
And of course, ramen.
I definitely ate a lot of those really gross 25-cent ramen packets.
This was our conversation. All right, this is the first session of APL Volumes. Go ahead and introduce yourself, man.
My name is Jeremy Young. I am the sous chef at Ramen Tatsu-Ya, and I've been working for that company for approaching 3 years now. Came in right after we opened, and yeah, that's me.
Welcome, Jeremy. So tell us where you're originally from and how you got to Austin.
I was born and raised in Los Angeles, California. My family still lives out there. And then shortly after I graduated high school, I moved up to San Francisco for school. And I lived in San Francisco for several years until I couldn't afford it anymore. And I went to go and look for the next best thing. Basically went to go in search of a city that was financially easier to live in, but also had all of the things that I had come to love about San Francisco. So food, culture, art, music, pretty much everything that young people love. I went to go in search of a city that had all those things, but was a little more accessible than sometimes San Francisco, Los Angeles, both. They can be a little closed off, kind of hard to break into those things. So I found Austin and moved here, not sight unseen. I had come to Austin on a few road trips with a friend, and we had explored a little bit, and we knew we already kind of liked the city, but I pretty much packed up, with like 2 weeks notice, packed up all my things into a truck, came out here, and the rest is history. I've been out here for four years and change now, and I love it out here.
What did you want to be when you grew up?
In high school, I've always wanted to be an artist, basically, and it's taken many different shapes and forms. In high school, I was really into music. I was in a lot of punk bands and metal bands, and I thought I wanted to be a touring musician. I still kind of do on some days, that never really goes away. But definitely tried to go and do that, played a lot of shows, did a couple tours, and there was just no money in it. And it was getting to the point, early college where I was like, man, I need to start making some money. I had been living away from home for a long time. San Francisco was really expensive to live in, and I got tired of just being a barista and like a bar back, trying to scratch up enough to pay rent, but while just playing shows all the time. So I decided to move on to the next thing and started going to school. I went to San Francisco State University to study art, and that's when I really fell in love with street art and graffiti art, screen printing, and I've always drawn my entire life, so that was a really easy step for me to say, hey, I'm just going to take this art more seriously now and become an artist. And I don't know if it was the fact that I didn't know the right people, or maybe it was just the wrong time to try and do that, but I pretty much poured all of my effort into becoming a quote-unquote successful artist, which in my head meant having gallery shows and selling things, selling prints, just pure fine art to people. And it basically fell flat for me. I was very unsuccessful at it. Not for lack of trying, but it didn't pan out for me. And I eventually got to a point where I was pretty miserable doing, like I said, those menial service industry jobs just to afford to be able to draw in my spare time, which was limited. So that kind of translated into, man, maybe I should just go back to my grandparents' generation, the concept of their careers, and just find something I'm good at doing naturally with my hands and turn that into a career, and then make art and music more into hobbies. And that kind of led me to cooking.
Where did you develop a passion for cooking?
And so it's a strange question. I definitely didn't have a premeditated notion at all from an early age that I wanted to do this. But now that I am doing it, looking back on the past, there's a lot of really interesting coincidences and little moments that I can vividly remember from my childhood that now that I'm a chef, I can be like, oh, that makes a lot of sense, you know. Definitely always have been interested in eating, always been interested in cooking, but I never even considered it as a career path until it kind of just happened.
Tell me about those coincidences.
Well, there was certainly, and I know I'm not alone in this, but there was certainly a lot of instant ramen that I ate, which is being a ramen-specific chef now is really bizarre because I've eaten ramen my entire life, you know, and I definitely ate a lot of those really gross 25-cent ramen packets. My mom hated it because they were so high in sodium. She thought it was bad for me. But that's certainly one of the weirder coincidences to look back now and be like, hey, I professionally cook really high-end craft ramen. And when I was 6, 7 years old, I was eating these these little packets from Savers in the dollar store. So that's one thing that I laugh about all the time.
You know, you said you went through this kind of artist and music phase and then college. How did you actually get in? Like, what was your first cooking job?
I think the real job that kind of got me interested in cooking was I was a bar back at this bar in San Francisco in the Mission called Sycamore. And all I did was bus tables. And then there was the one day that the fry cook that was supposed to show up had gone on a bender the night before, and he didn't make it to work because he was throwing up somewhere. And I was there, and I had been watching them for a while, and I kind of knew how to do it. I didn't know exactly how to. It was just fry. It was just a fryer, and it was simple things like sweet potato fries, and we had some donuts and other things like that. And I didn't know when things were done. So that was an annoying period where the guy who was training me was just like, man, just cook it till it's done. And I was like, I don't know when it's done, man. I bust tables, you know? So that was kind of the first exposure that I actually had to physically cooking food for people. And shortly, that was one of the last jobs that I had in San Francisco before I moved here. And I pretty much went straight from that job into culinary school. And so I think that job, looking back now, was kind of a big step towards working in a kitchen, where I actually kind of got over that fear of the unknown, and I was like, you know what, I could do this. This is not as hard as I thought it is.
So what made you choose culinary school then? Was it that job or some combination?
It was a combination of things. I think it was a little bit of that job. Like I said, I had always looked up to chefs. I love eating. So when I was in San Francisco, I definitely ate a lot of really good food and was interested in it. I started to learn about more composed plates and started to learn about ingredients that I didn't know about before just from cooking at home and trying new things. And so it was kind of to a point where, like I said earlier, I knew that being an artist was not working out for me. I knew that being a musician was not really going to work at that time. And so I was kind of looking for the next thing that was had a little more job security. It was a little more accessible conceptually to get into. So basically, if you work in a kitchen, you can just walk into a kitchen and just apply for a job. There's not really any prerequisites to that. But being an artist, it's kind of like you need to know the right people. You may or may not need to have a degree. You definitely need to be good at networking and selling yourself, which I was not good at any of that. So, but with cooking, it was just a job, you know. You could just walk into a kitchen and be like, hey, I can do that. So I kind of found cooking. I decided to go to culinary school basically because I realized that cooking was this cool hybrid between art and a really hands-on craftsman type job. And so I came out here. I went to culinary school in Austin at it formerly TCA. It was Texas Culinary Academy. Now I believe it's Le Cordon Bleu. But I went there and did the program and learned a lot, had a really good time. And that was pretty much my introduction into kitchens.
So what was your first job after that here in town?
My very first cooking job here in town was at a place called Roaring Fork. And it's kind of just a American comfort food kitchen. They do some really good dishes, really good burger, really good happy hour menu. Their mac and cheese is excellent. So that was my very first job. I was only there for 3 months, and that was as part of my externship through culinary school. But that kind of gave me the sense of a real commercial kitchen, how it felt to be on the line, how it felt to have the stress of tickets coming in, and you're in the weeds, and you're getting really behind, and there's this sense of urgency, like you need to get your food out. That was kind of my very first introduction to that, and I loved it. I absolutely loved it. I love working hard, and I love working fast, and I love it when something doesn't go right and you have to think on the fly and problem solve. So that sold me. Even though I was only there for a very short time, I'm sure I didn't make much of an impression at all. I definitely wasn't a good cook at that point. But that kind of, it got me, it definitely responded to me. And so from there, I went to work for, oddly enough, Apple, Apple Incorporated, the computer company. Their headquarters is here in town, and they actually have a giant open restaurant that is only for Apple employees, and it's inside the Apple headquarters. And it's kind of a funny story how I got that job. It was completely random, but looking back, totally meant to be. Basically, what happened was my roommate at the time and one of my good friends was working for Apple in the Apple store. And he told me that this restaurant existed because he had been there and eaten there. And he was like, yeah, the quality of the food is really awesome. The kitchen is beautiful. You should go and check it out, because he knew I was looking for another kitchen job. So one day after culinary school, I went straight from culinary school to the headquarters and started wandering around the building trying to figure out how to get inside, because it's Apple, so every door you have to badge into it. There's security guards everywhere. You have to sign in and know somebody in order to get inside, and basically have an appointment even just to get inside the building. I didn't know that. I thought it was just kind of I could probably just walk in and say, hey, I want a job. So I wandered around this building for like half an hour, 45 minutes, finally found the front door, which has metal detectors and security guards and a sign-in sheet. And I came in and said, hi, I'm looking for a job in a kitchen. And I was wearing my chef coat and chef scrubs and everything. I had my knife roll with me. I said, hey, I'm looking for a job in the kitchen. And the guy basically shut me down, was like, you can't come in unless you know somebody. Who is your appointment with? And I didn't know anybody in the kitchen, so I was like, I don't know. I mean, the chef, I guess. He was like, well, you need to know his first and last name. He needs to be expecting you. Otherwise, I can't sign you in. And fortunately, the other security guard saw my Le Cordon Bleu, or my TCA chef coat. And she said, oh, well, you're here for the interview, right? She thought I was somebody else that was supposed to come in at the exact same time for an interview. So she just let me in, even though I was the wrong guy. She didn't know that. So I come in and I sit down. The chefs come out to meet me, and they have this other guy's resume. And they were just like, so, David, it's nice to meet you, man. And I was like, oh, I'm not David. And they were really confused. And they were confused to the point where they were about to be like, well, you need to go. If you're not David, why are you here? And I basically talked my way into a job in the next half hour, just being really convincing. Oh, I want to work hard. I'm really eager to learn. Please take me on. And they ended up hiring me on the spot. And then I was at Apple for about 2 years after that.
Did you ever find out who that David guy was?
He never showed for the interview. So that was like the best part about it. It would be so weird if he had showed up 5 minutes after me and like, who are you? Yeah. Why are you taking my job? But he never showed up. So it kind of ended working out perfectly.
That's funny. So how long were you there at Apple?
It was a little under 2 years. I had a really good time working there. the coolest thing about Apple is that, it's Apple computers. So they have all of their income doesn't come from the kitchen. It comes from their computers and their iPads and iPhones and whatever. So the food is really just a labor of love to make the employees happy. So working there was great for developing my creativity as a chef because there were no limits at all to what I could cook. And they do a lot of local, seasonal, organic type cooking, and it rotates almost daily. So they have a bunch of different stations. They have like a wok station and a grill station, a pasta station, and each station does a different dish entirely every day. And so as a young cook, having almost no experience and going into a place where the menu changes every day, I learned so much about food in such a short period of time. And it was great too because I was able to use ingredients that I probably would never have access to in most other kitchens because Apple had no budget. So they would just be like, oh, you want foie gras, you want truffles, you want, all these really expensive ingredients, beluga caviar, sure. And you could just order it and cook with it, no questions asked. So that was really one of the best places for me, being completely green and inexperienced, to just absorb knowledge. And fortunately, I had a really awesome mentor there named Clark Trias. Shout out to the homie. He definitely took me under his wing. He was a really, really awesome, talented chef. And he kind of, at first, a lot of people were just like, why did we hire this guy with no experience? He's just going to be dead weight. And Clark, I think, identified that I had common sense and a good work ethic. And he was like, no, this guy could be valuable. And he basically took it upon himself to teach me everything he knew. And, I pretty much owe him everything as far as my culinary career because he really pushed me to be intelligent and smart and better than the cook next to me. And I really took that to heart. And so that was a big stepping stone for me, was Apple Kitchen, which is so strange to say.
That's cool.
Most people don't even know that place exists. So when I'm like, yeah, that was like my first real kitchen, they're like, what? The computer company?
Yeah, I've never heard of it. Where's he at now, Clark? Is he still there?
Clark's still at Apple, yeah.
Okay.
And he's doing a great job over there. So I'm really proud and honored to know him. I can call him a good friend now, which is awesome.
Yeah, that's very cool. So then how did you get involved with Ramen TatsuYa?
I actually, again, got involved with ramen through Clark. There's a program called staging where essentially if you want to go and gain some extra culinary knowledge, you can go and work at a restaurant for free. And it's also used if you're trying to apply for a job. So if you want to work at a restaurant, a lot of times they'll have you work for free for one day just to see how skilled you are. And then after that, they'll make you a job offer. So Clark had been staging at Ramen at TatsuYa for, I think, about a month. And he was working there part-time and doing like 2 nights a week because he was still full-time at Apple. And he told me, hey, this seems like something you'd be interested in. I was really interested in Asian cooking. And he kind of passed that on to me. Hey, they're looking for people. If you want to work a couple days, I'm sure they'd be glad to have you. And the funny thing is, I had actually tried to apply before I even worked for Apple, in between the end of Roaring Fork and culinary school and the start of Apple. I had looked for a lot of kitchen jobs, but nobody wanted to hire me because I had no experience. So I actually went to Ramen TatsuYa I think it was actually before the doors were open, because I remember going into the restaurant and there was like no chairs or tables in there, but it was just Chef Tako Matsumoto, who's one of the chefs that opened it, and then Tatsu Aikawa. They were in there and they were writing the menu. They were actually planning out what they were going to serve. And I went in there with my very embarrassingly short resume that was pretty much just 7 years at Starbucks and a couple other odd jobs, and said, hey, do you want to hire me? And I remember Tatsu asked me, I'm half Chinese, so I kind of look a little Asian, and I remember Tatsu asking me, are you Japanese? And I was like, no, I'm Chinese. And I remember him looking kind of disappointed in that, and I'm not sure if that's why I didn't get the job initially, but it was funny because maybe 3-4 months after that, I ended up working there anyway because of Clark. So I worked both jobs, Apple and Tatsu-Ya, for I forget how much time. And then eventually I realized that I liked the environment at Tatsu-Ya more than the environment at Apple. Apple was very kind of laid back, slower paced cooking. You had a lot of time and space to do things, and there wasn't really that sense of urgency. And at Tatsu-Ya, it was the opposite. They had just opened. There was a line out the door around the building every night. And you had to work super hard and really fast, or you weren't going to make it through the night. And I loved that. That really responded to me, probably just as a young, kind of crazy dude. It made a lot of sense for me. So eventually I decided to go completely all in at Tatsu-Ya and parted ways with Apple. And I've been with Tatsu-Ya ever since then.
So what was your first position at Tatsu-Ya?
First position was just base line cook. I worked a station called Hotline, which is basically all of the small bites. So I did everything that wasn't ramen. And that was that's kind of the entry-level cook position where if you don't have any experience with the cuisine, it's the best place to learn all of it. So I was there for a long time, probably 6 months, 7 months, only working that one station. And eventually I kind of bullied my way into the other stations just by being curious and asking questions and saying, hey, let me work that tonight, please. And so eventually got to work everything else, and now I'm the sous chef, which is hilarious to me still. But it's good.
That's cool. So what are the duties that you have now as a sous chef?
Sous chef is a really, really hard job. It's basically all of the responsibilities of a chef with very little of the reward, if that makes sense. You're kind of a chef in training, or like an assistant to the chef, kind of. So everything that it takes to run a restaurant, I do. But I also have to cook and clean and scrub the floors and take the trash out. You know, it's not a glamorous chef job where you're just creating new dishes and then hobnobbing with the locals and the customers. It's still very much a working class job. I place orders, do inventory, create the schedule, hiring and firing, cost, food cost control. HACCP plan is like basically our health code plan. So I have to deal with the health department, make sure everything is safe and clean. I have to train all the new hires. It's definitely, and then in addition to that, you work the line every night and you cook the food and you clean up the kitchen afterwards, and it's a little bit of everything. So it's fun because it keeps things interesting. Every day is a little different, and at the same time, I do get to create new food, and I get to play around with new food concepts and run specials, and it's kind of perfect for me right now as far as where my experience is in my career as a chef. It's perfect for me because I'm learning how to run a restaurant, be a good manager, and yet I also get to play with food every day. So, for those who want to be a cook, it's definitely a tier to push towards. I think it's a great platform to learn a lot and do a lot. But it's not for the faint of heart. It's a lot of hours. It's a lot of standing on your feet all day, a lot of stress, but it's fun.
Yeah, so what are the qualities that you would look for in, that you would expect someone to be successful at Tatsu-Ya? Like, what kind of person would you be looking for?
That's a really good question. The culinary world is a lot more accessible than people think it is. For those people who are just foodies and they like to go out and eat and they're curious about food, they could honestly probably become cooks and be very successful. The only things that it really takes are an enormous work ethic. You have to be able to work all day, every day, and have a good attitude about it. So definitely endurance and work ethic are key. Passion for food. Obviously, you have to care enough in order to make sure everything is perfect all of the time. And that can't ever wear off. You have to be so passionate about the food all the time so that in those moments where you're exhausted and you're coming out of an 80, 90, 100-hour work week, you still have to care about that last plate that you sell and make sure it's perfect. Passion is everything. And also passion lends itself to education. So if you're not growing as a cook, you're probably not a good cook. You know what I mean? Like if you're not constantly pushing yourself to learn a new cooking technique that you've never seen or smell and taste a new ingredient that you've never worked with, then you probably somewhere deep down inside don't really care that much about food. It's kind of a natural thing that goes hand in hand with being a chef. So for sure, work ethic, definitely passion for food. And then other than that, the third thing that everybody needs to be good at cooking is really just common sense. Because cooking is very uncomplicated when you break it down to its base elements. All you really have to do is notice when something's about to burn, and turn it off. It's just it's not as complicated and recipe and science driven as everyone thinks it is. You can get really sciencey and complex with food, but ultimately at the end of the day, it's being able to smell and taste something and know when it's either good or bad. And it's just common sense. Doing things the simplest, most efficient way will make you a really good cook.
Gotcha. What are some things you've created there at TatsuYa that you're proud of?
Oh, man, I'm really proud of my pickles. I've been that's something that I was terrible at when I started working at TatsuYa. I didn't know how to make a good pickle, and at home I would just buy pickles. And looking back now, that's embarrassing because pickles are really easy to make if you know how to do it. So over the past year, I've been trying to perfect some of my pickle recipes. So we have a plate called the skimono, which is kind of just house pickles. It's a very traditional Japanese izakaya pub cuisine type dish, and it's just assorted pickles, whatever happens to be seasonal. Anytime there's pickles on the menu, a lot of times it's me. I'm really proud of them. We did a dish called koroke, which is basically a Japanese croquette, and a croquette is like a fried potato cake, basically. And we did a version of that was really traditional Japanese, that had some pork belly in it and some scallions and had a really nice sauce on top. And that was something that was the most satisfying thing about that dish was I made it knowing that it was really traditional Japanese, and everybody told me that, if you do this wrong, people are going to be mad at you, because this is kind of the standard that everybody who grows up in Japan, their mom makes this for them. It's every night. It's like a Japanese snack that everybody's had. Everybody has a certain idea of what it should be. So the coolest thing was when we started selling that dish, and there were some really traditional Japanese customers coming in, and they were saying, "This is better than my mom's," which I still is crazy to hear, but it's really exciting and satisfying as a chef to be like, yes, I did something right,
That's cool. How traditional are your ramens, and how much are they like kind of a riff off of tradition?
I would say that almost everything that's on the menu at both of we have a north location and a south location. Almost everything that's on those menus is rooted in tradition. It comes from a really traditional idea. Some things are straight up exactly how they're done in Japan. Things like our gyoza dumplings, our steamed dumplings are pretty traditional. You could probably go to Japan and get that exact same thing at an izakaya. Other things are kind of, like you said, riffs off of different regional styles. And ramen is regional, so depending on what city and what area of Japan you're in, you're going to get vastly different styles of ramen. And so some of our things are fusions of two different cities where we took components from one style and put them into the other style. At lunch, we serve a ramen called the Old School, which is like a Tokyo shoyu style ramen, and it's very, very traditional to the Tokyo area, where it's a kind of a lighter, clarified chicken broth, and that kind of came from a lot of Chinese immigrants coming into Tokyo and being very poor, and they couldn't afford pork bones or beef bones or things like that. And so they made this really light, cheap chicken broth. So that one is like really traditional, close to what you could get on the streets of Tokyo. And then at night we sell a style called tonkotsu, which is very creamy, heavy, very pork, bone marrow heavy broth. And so, I would say it's maybe 70-30, traditional and then experimentation, because our chef Tatsu is a Japanese immigrant. He's from Japan, so he has his roots in tradition, but also, he was a DJ for a long time here in town. He's very much, a young Austinite and a young, hungry chef. So we definitely play around with food a lot, but I would say most of it certainly has roots in tradition.
How collaborative is the scene here? Do you get a lot of exchange between chefs and restaurants?
Oh, for sure. We have so many friends here in town just from, either we went to culinary school with them and then we both ended up successful, or we've done events together, Austin Food and Wine or La Dolce Vita. We've done pop-up restaurants, guest chef nights at our restaurants. So it's certainly extremely collaborative. Everybody's kind of everybody's friends, unless you're like a really, really horrible person. For the most part, there's a general sort of across-the-board respect between chefs. So, and that's the best thing, is like I can go out and eat places and see my other chef friends and be like, hey, how's your restaurant doing? What are you doing with food that's exciting? And we can share things like, if one of my cooks is tired of cooking ramen and he wants to move on to another place, I can release him and be like, you know what, man, go and work at this place because, Chef Andrew Weishart at Contigo is fantastic. You can learn so much from him. Or, go and work at a Second Kitchen and learn what Dave Bull has to say about food because he's brilliant. So it's all this awesome kind of, we're all friends and we're all trying to learn and grow together and try to prevent any bad blood from happening, and just, it's like friends helping friends, It's like, I want you to be successful, you want me to be successful, let's just do it together. So that's a really great thing about Austin.
So when you're going out to eat in Austin, where are you eating at?
Well, I already mentioned Contigo. That's one of my favorite restaurants in town. There's so much good food here. Swift's Attic is fantastic, down on Congress. Let's see. There's a food trailer on South First called Tommy Want Wingy, which is awesome. It's just chicken wings, but the dudes actually go the extra mile there's a technique called Frenching, where you basically scrape the meat down the bone and leave a really exposed bone at one end of the chicken wing. They do that to every single wing, so it's almost like a meat lollipop. Really fun to eat, really delicious. As far as restaurants, definitely Contigo. Swift's Attic is awesome. Second Kitchen, foreign and domestic. Odd Duck is so good that we lucked out and opened our second location directly across the street from Odd Duck, which is so cool because I can go and get a beef tongue pastrami sandwich, and they make a mean burger. There's a lot of good food out here, and Lenoir also. I could go on and on about food. There's
not a comprehensive list, but
no, but not by
just
any
some
means.
Highlights. Yeah. So you mentioned your mom was a librarian. What's your relationship just to the institution of the library?
I love libraries. I've always loved libraries. It's a really familiar environment to me. Like I said, my mom was a librarian. She definitely pushed literature on us at a very, very young age. I think my older brother started reading when he was like 2. The first book he read was Go Dog Go by Dr. Seuss. So from a very young age, we've been kind of pushed into reading, and I remember some very specific things, like my mom telling me when I'm putting books on a shelf not to ever put a book horizontally on the top of the other books because it would damage the spine. And also when I'm reading it, not to fold the cover back. She had an ethos about reading and about books that where it was almost sacred to her, and she definitely passed that on to me and to my brother. But we pretty much grew up in libraries. That was like what we would do after school. You know, instead of going and playing sports, we would just go to the library and read Goosebumps and Hardy Boys and Choose Your Own Adventure and Animorphs and like all that stuff. I mean, and my mom, like I said, was very literature heavy. She's extremely well read as far as classics go, and so she introduced me to Dickens and Twain and all of these classics of literature at a really young age that has certainly shaped who I am and the way that I think about life in general.
What were some of those books or authors that you read that really affected you?
I think Ernest Hemingway was probably one of the first authors that I really felt a strong emotional and philosophical connection to. That was probably early high school that I started getting really into that school of authors. Gertrude Stein was in there as well. But definitely, I think Hemingway opened a lot of doors for me as far as really personally connecting to a work of literature. Before that, I think it was mostly just to hear a cool story. Not that there's anything wrong with that, but I definitely think Hemingway was one of the first that I actually felt something emotionally, and it changed the way I thought about reading and being as a human being. Certainly, Kurt Vonnegut is, he pretty much completely changed the way that I think about life just from reading his books. And so that I was a very jaded, kind of cynical guy before I picked up my first Kurt Vonnegut book, which was Breakfast of Champions. And then I read Slaughterhouse-Five after that and Cat's Cradle, and I just couldn't stop reading Vonnegut because it was like he spoke directly to me. And I loved the bluntness of his sentences, but also the poetry of them. He could say the most profound thing in a 4-word sentence, and I would just sit there and I would read that one 4-word sentence over and over again, trying to grasp what it meant. And his books really taught me to be happy with who I am and to not let any of the really horrible things that can happen to you just by happenstance in life. It taught me not to let that break me and beat me. And that was pretty revolutionary to me as like a young high schooler. You know, you don't really think about any of that. You kind of just like, if something bad happens to you, you're just like, man, this is dumb. You know, like why is this happening to me? You get angry about it and you complain about it a lot. And that was definitely revolutionary to me to think about not complaining about it and just being like, that happened, you know, life and acceptance of both good and bad things and learning to appreciate the good things and not hate the bad things. That all came from Vonnegut. So that I think Hemingway and Vonnegut for sure were formative in the early years of reading.
Yeah, that's all the questions I got, man. Do you have anything you wanted to say?
I wanted to, if I could, just talk briefly about some of the cookbooks that have specifically affected me. I think for anybody that wants to get into cooking, and I'm certainly not going to be the first person to say this, but Kitchen Confidential by Anthony Bourdain is a must-read for anybody that even likes food, likes eating in a restaurant, or has any desire to be a cook. It's probably the most realistic depiction to date of what it's actually like to live a restaurant life. And I read that really early on. It definitely set the fire underneath me. And that was kind of one of the first books that was food specific that I read. And I was like, wow, restaurant life sounds crazy, but really rewarding. And then I think a somewhat lesser known chef autobiography, but kind of in the same vein as Kitchen Confidential, is called Blood, Bones, and Butter. And that's written by Gabrielle Hamilton, who's an amazing chef. She has this fantastic French kind of bistro in New York City called Prune. fantastic. She's one of the few celebrity chefs. I guess she's a celebrity chef now. Not too many. She's not as famous as Anthony Bourdain, but she's getting there. But she wrote a book called Blood, Bones, and Butter, which is about her entire childhood leading up to her culinary career and eventually becoming a restaurateur, chef, owner. And that book really responded to me because it kind of mirrored my path, like we were talking about earlier, not knowing what you wanted to do. She never intended to be a chef. She never had any interest in cooking other than just happening to do it as a job. And that's a really powerful book, really well read. She studied English in college, which was like another one of her. It was like me studying an art in college. She thought she wanted to be a writer, and then she ended up being a chef. But because she was a writer and has a background in English, it has excellent prose. She's very eloquent. So it's a really well-written book about the path from being a young person with no idea to being a successful chef. I highly recommend that one. And there's a fantastic cookbook called Washoku that's it's been pretty crucial for me learning how to cook Japanese food from almost no experience. And it kind of lays forth the tenets, the very traditional tenets of how to cook Japanese cuisine in a very respectful, harmonious way. Washoku actually literally means harmony in food, or the harmony of food. And that one was pretty formative for me when I was just getting into cooking ramen and cooking Japanese food, and I had no idea what I was doing. And I read that book, and it definitely it has a comprehensive list of all the ingredients and that you need to know, and it also teaches the idea of respecting food, which is pretty crucial to good Japanese food. You have to respect anybody who is ever involved in the production of the food, all the way from the poor, illiterate rice farmer who is standing in the paddy harvesting your rice. You have to respect that guy's work in order to truly create a good dish with his rice. And the truck driver who brought you the rice, and the delivery guy, and the produce purveyor, anybody, the dishwashers, anybody who had any part in making this meal happen, respect all of that hard work, and it'll pay off. So that Washoku is Elizabeth Ondo wrote that book. It's fantastic for anybody who wants to learn about Japanese cooking. Yeah, I just wanted to plug those books because I love them a lot, and they've definitely helped me grow as a chef.
All right, give us one last plug.
Please come and eat at Ramen TatsuYa. I'm really proud of the food that we do, and I would just love to see more people enjoying our cuisine, and definitely get out and eat your way around Austin, because there's a lot of really talented, hardworking guys out there they work all day, every day to make really fantastic food. So definitely encourage people to come in, not only to our restaurant, but to any of the great local restaurants here in town. I think that's crucial to our growth as a city and as a culinary community.